Where's the chorus?
We're getting started. Welcome to the Governance Committee meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We'll start with a roll call. Councillor Tabor.
Here.
Councillor Lombardi.
Here.
And I'm Councillor Cook, and I am here. The first thing on our agenda is to review and approve the minutes from January 9th, 2023. I will share those on the screen so everyone is aware that we have the minutes. If you are watching this from home, the minutes are also available on the website.
Move we accept the minutes.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Any questions, comments?
It's a nice addition to the record to have all those former mayors.
Yeah.
So, yes, this was quite a long meeting. We were very fortunate to have several former mayors join us, and I still thank them again for doing so. So with that, can I get a vote to approve? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye. Any opposed? No. The minutes are approved.
I think that detail minutes was really good, actually, to have it.
Yeah.
Yes, and they're very helpful.
Sometimes, detail, you don't need the detail, but I thought that was good.
We are going to go ahead and move on to old business. We had discussed, I should say that we had talked about having a parks discussion at this meeting, but we postponed that until middle of February to make sure we could get enough people here to have that parks discussion. Instead, we moved up the discussion around draft language on a donations policy, and I'm going to share that document with us. I want to preface our discussion today by saying that this is a very early draft form of this document, and it's based upon the work that the committee has done in the past in discussing donations and donations policies, and we are just now looking at this language. So we're going to go through it in quite a bit of detail today, but not anticipate any action today on the language. So with that said, I will bring up the donations policy. I have to stop sharing and reshare. So bear with me. Here is the draft donations policy. Let me get this. And I will try.
Do you want me to see if I can get it back?
We're going to try to adjust it so anyone at home can make sure that they see this on the recording.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the draft form of the donations policy. And it starts out by just explaining the objective for writing the donations policy. I think that it's important to remember here that we don't really have a general policy around donations. We have several other policies.
Yeah, if I could just clarify, so the city council has never adopted a donation policy, so that is what this is intended to do, which is to give some more specific direction at the city council level. As you know, it has been the practice to bring donations to the city council, but it has been a practice. It's not actually documented anywhere. So it was kind of starting with that premise and balancing in the fact that some of the parts of the municipal organization have very detailed policies and practices, such as the library, because they have a board of library trustees. The library trustees, under their governing authority under Chapter 1, have the authority to accept donations, and that is in part why I invited Christine Fries, the library director, to be here, because she has such great experience working with the library trustees that I thought it might be valuable to this committee to get her perspective. As you also know, the police department has a policy and practice of how they bring them up, although the city council does see those ones. So I just thought it's a evolving opportunity here to get a little more definition and trying to, meet the committee's needs. But I think it's definitely a conversation. So.
Thank you. And I think it's really important for us to remember that all these other entities in the city do have their own policies. And so it's not the goal, I think, of this exercise to supersede anyone else's policies. The goal is to create a policy so that the council understands what the policies are across the whole system, so that everyone is very familiar with our processes, and that it's clear. So starting with the objective and purpose, this is very general language, and working with a deputy city manager, deputy city attorney, I asked for assistance in drafting language based upon policies other cities use. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. These are policies that are coming from other places that seem to fit more or less the way Portsmouth is doing things, and to provide us guidance where we don't have clear guidance. So you will note here that this is kind of a general overarching view of what the objective is. And then we also make sure that we provide language here to allow the other entities to accept donations and to have their policies. I think that that's really critical. Again, we don't want to supersede anyone. Unless we find a practice to be a considerable problem. In that case, we might want to provide a little guidance. But I don't think we have found that so far. So has everyone looked at this?
Yeah, I think we've done a good job in this draft of protecting against self-interest and protecting against self-interest for the donor or or anything that would compromise the city. I did have a question about the language around ongoing maintenance.
Okay.
The donation shall include an endowment sufficient to cover them, i.e. 20 times the estimated amounts. So we're saying 20 times the annual amount.
Hang on, which section are you in?
I'm in 8B.
Did you want to?
And, maybe we can delay that until we get to it if you want to go sequentially.
Let's go sequentially so that we make sure that we're bringing everyone along at home.
Okay.
Because I don't think anyone's had a chance to look at this. I want to make sure
Correct.
that everyone has a chance to really look at the language. If there are no questions on objective and purpose, when we get to scope, I think it's important to highlight here that we do say that the policy is intended to encompass all donations made in the city.
And I left, like I said, I used a model from another community. But what you'll see is when you get to like the donations process and accepting donations under paragraph 3, it calls out that the school board and the library board of trustees have authority to basically handle their own donations. And it could probably be said more artfully. But I'm assuming that what you would set here at the city council level would be kind of broad policy and kind of what you'd like to see come to the city council for specific approval and recognition and basic processes. But the details and the implementation of those policies and practices take place, at least particularly for some of, like the library and the school, really within their own structure, but they wouldn't be inconsistent. So that was my hope, that I don't know if we've achieved that, because I haven't circulated this to everyone, so this is just a very preliminary draft to get some initial feedback and thinking, with my thought that then I would circulate whatever draft sort of emerges from here to all of the departments, to the school. Do you see anything that seems inconsistent? Suggestions, and then bring that reporting back to all of you. So that was my thinking, is to kind of hit the highlights with the thought that I would then gather input from all of these entities, and we'll see if we have, hopefully, a nice, there's an umbrella, and then there's all these pieces that really get done just consistent with and really implementing the details. So that was my thought.
Thank you.
We'll see.
I think we'll get
Yeah.
there. And I will ask our library director, if you see anything, please feel free to jump in to the conversation.
Okay.
Because you have direct experience with this in ways that the council hasn't dealt with this at this level yet.
I'm
So-
taking notes, and I think at the appropriate time we can walk through, but this is great.
So you'll see generally the scope. You'll see the exclusions. I think that this is key, where we have other policies where we exclude. We just did an update to our public art policy that has real clear guidelines on donations. Volunteerism, that's an
Right.
important exclusion, which is kind of a donation in kind at the time.
Exactly. That's why I figured we ought to be express about it.
Yes. And then we have ordinance that also defines gifts to individual employees. So it's important to recognize that if the city council adopts this is a policy of the council, not an ordinance. An ordinance supersedes it.
Right.
And that's why public art is excluded. It's also an ordinance.
Yep. I also, what I saw in some of the policies in other communities is that they would somewhat blur or try to capture everything in one policy. And as you know, gifts to individual employees, at Christmas time, someone brings in a box of candy or something. That we really weren't talking about that kind of gift. What we're looking at are the donations that are for the benefit of the organization in some form, whether it's cash or money to support a program or books or other tangible items, the park benches, etc. So I was cognizant to try and keep it within a very specific realm for clarity and ease. We'll see.
Yes, Councilor?
Yes, I'm looking at 2.2C.
Yep.
Yes.
The donations to individual employees are governed by Chapter 1.
Yep.
What is chapter, where is that?
So that is the section in which the ethics ordinance exists, and there's a limit of $100.
Okay.
I don't have the site off the top of my head, but it's in that section
And
of
there was
chapter
something
1.
else then citing that donations shouldn't be given to individuals or something. Where did I see that?
Article 8 is the Code of Ethics.
Yeah.
Right. So if there are no more questions here, we'll look at definition.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, do you see where the,
Well, I was under general conditions, 4.2. So, I mean, that seems a little in conflict of the one I just.
Yeah, I agree. We need to kind of tweak that.
okay.
That just stuck out.
Yep.
For me, yeah.
Yeah, I think what was intended, and maybe there's a way to draft language to reconcile, is you wouldn't want a gift, kind of like an endowed chair. So think if you are a faculty member, you wouldn't want that faculty member necessarily to be soliciting for their own endowment to, a tenured, their funded chair. Like I said, I kind of cut and paste from
Yeah.
someone else's. So I think if we could circle that and we'll kind of noodle that over, but I think there's one thing, like I said, trying to find you go to a conference and you want to be able to eat the free lunch when you're an employee, right? It's trying to not regulate that because that's already regulated as it can't be worth more than $100 in the chapter 1 there.
Yeah.
But there might be other types of intersections
Right.
where the gift is to the entity, meaning the city of Portsmouth or the rec department or the library, but you don't want it to individually benefit an employee.
Exactly. So you
So
don't
it's-
want somebody donating a certain amount of money in order for an employee whose job has been eliminated by chance, so they can keep their job,
Yep.
which is always a possibility that somebody steps in and says, well, I'll donate the money.
Or maybe you do. Maybe that's not an issue. So I flag it, but I think that's why like I said, the draft I was cutting and pasting from. But maybe you do want someone to say, okay, I'm going to donate all new, let's say, furniture.
Right.
I'm just trying to think ahead. And this is why I thought more voices and why it'll be good to get feedback from the other departments, because there may be a whole list of scenarios that happen and we should kind of weigh them. So that's why I'm thinking get the input today and I'll circulate it and we'll get input back, which I'll deliver to you and say, okay, do you think we should tweak this or what do you think? So,
Exactly.
So to what
Yeah.
Kate just said, though, so let's say there's a position that someone says, I really think this position is important. My friend is in that position, but I can fund the position. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to retain that person, but if you want to retain that person, is that a conflict?
It's a question, right? Because it kind of does set up a conflict, because then you might lose the donor if you don't retain the person. So that's where the conflict, I think, really arises.
Yeah.
The question is around ethics, and can you accept donations with strings attached?
and that would ultimately be with exceptions, perhaps for library and school, which have clear authority to accept their own donations. That would be for the city council because it comes with strings. It's as we've brought any number of donations to the city council, for example, for the cemetery work, where they want it, to go for cemetery, for building the database, to identify where certain graves are located. It's very specific, and it requires the city council to say, yes, we think that's an approved and important purpose. So you're agreeing to those special strings, and that's the way, from my perspective, it should be done, because they are special strings.
Yeah.
So that might be the check, if you will. We might be able to take out that 4.2, knowing that our structure generally is anything with strings attached do tend to come to the city council for confirmation that you're willing to accept those limitations. So I'll put we'll flag that one right there.
Let's get there. Let's get through the
Yep.
twos and the,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so that we make sure we've actually reviewed these publicly. The definition of donations is followed by examples of donations. Then there's the donation process right after that. And basically, this allows internally for the development of policies. And that's, I think, really important, because most of our departments have policies. It's just the council that really doesn't. So this basically endorses that procedure.
What about You know, the one that you always hear about is a city official or a government official is hosted at an event or taken off to Fenway Park and somebody buys them tickets, or transportation's provided for so gifts of entertainment, transportation, that kind of thing.
Well, again, that wouldn't be addressed by this policy because that you're talking about an individual gift, as I'm hearing you, to an employee or a board member, and that is governed right now just by section, the Chapter 1, Section 8,
Live
which
at
is your ethics.
$100
Yep,
limit.
$100.
Yeah.
So if that, the value of that ticket or the value of that item, and I have had inquiries over the years in legal departments, hey, I won X at, at some event, can I accept it? And we look at the value of it, and then sometimes they turn it down because it's more than that, so.
So these are strictly donations for assets or programs of the city.
Correct. Now, if you want to, we could talk elsewhere, but I'm just trying to keep it very clear.
Right. And we'll
For
get
what-
to that other piece. I think
Yeah.
that's important to remember. That's actually on our docket for the year, is looking at the actual ethics
Ethics ordinance, yeah.
rules. Yeah. So,
Yep.
so we will get there
Yep.
as part of this overall
Yep.
review. So when we get to section 3, it's on accepting donations. I think that it's important here, there's a noted exception for the school board and the library board of trustees. This is current practice. This section requires us to think about, do we like the current practice? Do we want the current practice to be modified? Do we want more entities to take on their own responsibility for review as well? I mean, that's the other big question. Does the city council want to review donations to police and fire that both have their own elected commissions as well? So in that sense, there's not a lot of difference from them and the school board and the trustees of the library. So
Yeah.
thinking about, do we want everyone to follow the practice that we see right now with the library and the school board? Or do we like it as is with fire and police still coming through City Hall and through the city council?
Normally, I'd like to devolve that authority to the boards and commissions, but over the years, there have been gifts and money back and forth involving police that I think we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, well, there's extreme examples of that, too,
Yeah.
I think that we have to be cautious with that, just if for nothing else, for the visibility of it.
Right. Yep.
And I guess here the other question is, do we put in a clause that if we hit a certain donation level, or if we hit a certain, you could push this back and say, when we're getting donations of $5 gift cards or $10 gift cards, which is what the council sees a lot of times coming through the police department.
Right.
Does the council review that, or does the police commission review that? And then, but then if anything is a grant, a major donation over, donations over a certain amount
Right.
get reviewed. We could also tie, certain provisions to things before they come to the council as well.
Yeah, and I think that could be a higher threshold than the $100.
Yeah, I just threw something in here.
So, we could put everyone in the same position, but have certain requirements for those two other entities that when we hit a certain level
Right.
of donation, that it comes before the council. or a certain type of donation comes before the council.
Had we talked about a threshold level before? $100 or $1,000 or $500?
No, I
we
just
didn't.
grabbed that. A lot of communities, as far as I could see, do use thresholds. And this, actually, I can tell, I must have been interrupted when I was drafting this section, because I feel like it needs to get broken up and restructured a little bit differently. But a lot of communities don't bring every donation as the city council now sees, library and school accepted. They have a threshold, and what they do is perhaps they do a quarterly report where they say, okay, here are all the smaller donations, and you just kind of, it's for informational purposes, and, it gives the city council an opportunity to kind of acknowledge in a more public document, here it is. Now, frankly, we've got a website. You can literally post every donation somewhere, and then when you get the quarterly report, you update it and, make little fanfares or something. There are things to do that we, when we have more support with the website, we could do more of in terms of that notice and public recognition piece. A lot will, so it really is kind of up to you. I do think it's an interesting idea for police and fire. So leaving aside, again, library and school, which tends to do its own thing, for police and fire, you could set a threshold of, say, $50 or $100. So whenever all those small little gift cards come in for pizzas and things like that they get, which often they, will just distribute within the department, it just goes through their processes. And you don't have to see all those, but they record them because, as you know, they have their process that they go through in terms of a donation comes in or a gift of food comes in and how they process that, that we just leave that all in their realm, and it's anything over $50 or that's cash or however you want to structure it would then come to the city council for more formal recognition and acceptance and kind of provide that check for you. So that's an option, do that and see how it goes.
I guess my thought was that there is an elected body that oversees that, so I guess I was thinking a threshold would be more than $50, more than $100. I don't know what it would be, but because there's an elected body that does oversee that, and then the only problem becomes then, and this is a thing I know the mayor is very interested in, is having public recognition for things. So, I think we all are interested in that, but I know he's adamant about it.
We could probably certainly do a better job on public recognition. I think that's something we tuck into our.
Well, I just, in thinking about having a larger amount go through the police commission or fire commission and not the council, so.
I wonder if we couldn't, we could publish it on the website. We could also publish it in the newsletter, potentially, quarterly, maybe, in the newsletter. And the other way that we could do this is we could attach to the council packet, once every quarter, a list of all the donations with a thank you for all these, and
the
reference it.
webpage.
Yeah, and reference it and say, we've received a lot of donations, the city appreciates, make sure that we highlight that in a council meeting without going through
The individual.
every individual donation. I think one of the advantages of the smaller donations not coming to the council is it helps address the concern around not necessarily identifying all the donations that come into police and fire. They have conflict of interest policies of their own around identification of donations because you don't want any undue influence for donations coming in. So if they come in quarterly to the council and it doesn't say this donation to the police, it just says a donation, and it lists the monetary amount. then nobody knows where that donation went. So there is that advantage as well. You know, that's very important, I think, especially in avoiding those conflicts. Yeah, for them.
And as you'll recall from our past discussions where we kind of touched on this, some of the police department sometimes really wants to have anonymous donations precisely so that although the police chief and the commission may know who the donation is from, they may want to withhold that information from the ranking officers so that there's no perception that some business that may have donated something doesn't get any kind of preferential treatment, that, you know, really trying to maintain that sense of, you know, we're all treated equally, which is, you know, particularly given the nature of their work and their intersections with the public, has a lot of value. And certainly, you know, as we saw when we looked at the police department's existing SOPs, that they were cognizant rightly of that, and that's why the commission would often hear about certain donations in their non-public sessions so that they could maintain that, you know, anonymity and try and be cognizant of no preference. So.
Yeah, I think there's also an advantage at the council level for some of these things. Say somebody wanted to donate to the city, specifically to a department that has a responsibility for some kind of code enforcement. You don't want to identify to the people working in code enforcement who made that donation, or that it was made directly to benefit them from a certain individual. So while you can recognize the individual for the overall donation, you don't have to say who it went to in the city, so that there is no perception of favors in code enforcement. It's really critical.
Does the legal department ever get donations?
I would say we get candy dropped off at Christmas. That's kind of it's those kind of things at the
Yeah.
holidays.
Yeah.
But,
I know the library deals with donations in this sense. Have you had any experience with wanting to try to, I mean, the library's in a unique position that I think you generally are happy to get donations, but how does the library kind of deal with this perception of conflict ever?
I'll give you a couple examples. Now, I haven't, in my tenure, not only as director but as assistant director, we haven't had any, we've had an additional donation. We haven't had any really big kind of, we want to give you $50,000 kinds of donations. But we've had a couple of things that'll give you an example of things that we question. I go to a conference every year, and that even perception, so it's nice. I thought it was $50, so it's nice to know it's $100. But there's a perception, I feel, that if I were considering a vendor we don't work with and they said, let me take you to dinner, I would say no. Or I would say, I'll go, but we'll pay for it. Because even if it was $50, I think that there's this perception of, I liked your wording here, no reciprocal consideration is sought, right? There's just that, it's a bad optics. So we deal with that on occasion. We do get cookies and candy at holidays and some other times of the year. We more frequently, and we do have occasionally bigger pieces, like you may have seen the donations that put the statue out front for a memorial to a library patron. Those go through a lot of discussion because of, as you mentioned in here, operational maintenance. You know, somebody says what you really need is a park bench, and we say, no, we really don't. Or we don't want to have to maintain that. More frequently, we get monetary donations of $50, $100, either for no reason. I got one for last month for $100 because you guys are doing a great job. And there was clearly no strings attached, no expectations, and that is easy. Then there are those that are given a memorial by a family who says, please give to the library in lieu of flowers or something. In those cases, we go to the family and say, we've received X dollars. Tell us about your loved one, because that will guide us in, they were gardeners, they were artists, and then we can say to them, we're looking at maybe putting this toward programming or toward materials, and we'd like it, because it's in their honor, we'd like to respect that. But again, it's very clear in our donations that it's up to us to decide that, and that nobody could come in and say, you must buy XYZ books. That is not good. We also get things in kind, but since we're mostly talking about money, I'll skip that. The other one that has always seemed clear to me is that and I don't think it's covered in this policy at all, is grants. So they clearly have strings. And it would never occur to me not to take that to the council to say, we have not only for acknowledgement, yay, we got a federal grant, but also because, hey, they're expecting us to match the funds, or we have to do reporting, or we have to use it for certain objectives. But otherwise, we would be looking at all of those things with regard to our mission and our values, and seeing if there was some reason not to accept from a given entity. And generally, as I told Suzanne at one point, ours are generally from individuals. These are not, generally speaking, with the exception of the Garden Club, which gives us an annual donation, which is most appreciated and is clearly around gardening. We don't generally get things from groups that have any, they certainly don't have a say in it, but they also generally don't have an agenda, which I think is different from some places.
Thank you. That's actually very, very helpful.
Yeah. And I'll make a note, I'll add an express provision in here somewhere that says all grants, because that was intended,
Right.
would still continue to come to the city council from the usual sources.
I don't know if you want me to talk about book donations at this point, or you want to get to the...
Book donations are particularly tricky, I'd say.
They are.
I don't know.
I just don't know if this is the right space.
Let me ask, before you leave accepting donations and move to books, you kind of toyed with what to do about that $100 figure, whether you want to see them all, do you have a, recognizing that this is still preliminary, not locked in, I'll get feedback from the other departments, but do you have a feeling on this at all?
Go ahead, Councilor Tabor.
Well, I think the lower it is, the more things are visible. So I think if it's $100, that's good, particularly if we're operating with the quarterly update. So I'm inclined to keep it low. It's not efficient, but then transparency is never efficient. So.
Concur with that entirely.
Councilor Lombardi, do you have any thoughts on that? Is it
No, I would agree with what Councilor Tabor says.
okay?
And do you have a preference with regard to police and fire, whether you want them to just go ahead and they'll manage their own under 100, and we'll just have them put in the list, the quarterly list? Or what do you want to do for over 100? Do you have I know we kind of danced around that topic. I don't know how
Because
often.
I'm fine with them just accepting them themselves as long as we get a listing that
Under
we can
100.
share.
Under 100.
Under 100.
Yeah.
You want to keep it at 100?
Why don't we do that for the next draft, and we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see where that
What
goes.
happens?
Yeah.
When you say listing, whether quarterly or in a regular time period, do you mean with names or anonymous, a bulk?
Depending upon how, I think that we should be really clear, depending upon how the authority wants it recognized. And we would always prefer to recognize individuals, I think, so that we're thanking them. But if there's a reason why the governing entity doesn't want that individual recognized, I think anonymous is fine.
And I do think some donors actually prefer to be anonymous.
Yeah.
I know I've actually, in many cases, decided not to give to various things because I would prefer to give anonymously so as not to, for a whole bunch of reasons. But there are donors that actually prefer to just give and not have that attachment of their contribution.
And it makes me think that we should put that somewhere,
Yeah.
make it clear, because what we do currently is public. We report to, it's not that the trustees accept them, but we report it. We got these donations this month, and we give the names unless it is anonymous. If someone were to leave $50 cash, we'd have no way. But generally, they're checks, and whether it's in memoriam or not, some people may not want to be, and right now, they are going into our official minutes.
Yep.
So that's a thing for us to think about, whether we want that. I think the quarterly, just telling you the amount is no problem at all. To run a report and say, this quarter, the library received $300 in public donations, I think is great, but I think it hadn't really occurred to me before that some people might say, I don't want my name going to city council.
Right.
I just want to give you some money and that's it.
I think it's reasonable, and if we had, a report that was, you received X amount of donations and the majority of that was anonymous, but we'd
like to recognize
these donations from these donors.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess I would really like the input of the fire commission and the police commission on these. Maybe they want to be protected by the city council, so.
That's why I'm looking forward to getting your input, and then
Yeah.
I'll reach out and get their input.
Yes. Yes, I think we're starting here, then it's going to them
And
for
Yep.
a response, and then coming back here. So that is definitely the goal. We don't want to do anything that would alter their policies, and that's why we've looked at their policies
Yeah.
as well. So I think it might be,
I'll rework this section 3 a little bit based on this conversation and see if I can capture it a little bit clearer.
great. Now we're at 4, which is good. General conditions, the no advantage is to accrue to the donor. I think that's the critical piece, and that's the one that the police has always been concerned about.
Other than recognition.
Yes. Other than recognition. And I've seen policies, which is interesting, from other cities, I should note, that say even recognition, that there should be no expectation even of recognition.
Right.
Then the council isn't in a situation that if you miss somebody by accident, that they have the expectation, because it's in the policy that they shouldn't have the expectation, but then we can go ahead and still recognize them. But I think it should be clear when you donate to the city, you're not anticipating recognition. And there's the question on 4.2.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me noodle that one, the 4.2.
Okay, because it might technically benefit a
Right.
city employee.
Right.
But that's an employee maybe didn't solicit it.
Right.
It still might benefit them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll work on that.
Okay. I think 4.3 is self-explanatory. Eligible uses. This just basically says that, I think that we can use the donations for any programming or services or facilities or anything that we're doing as a city, just recognizing that. But you notice it doesn't say, what's nice there is that this is what they're used for, not for, oh, we're going to take the money and give it to somebody else.
Right.
So it's clear that it has to be used for the city,
Yeah.
for the purposes of the city here.
Yep.
And that they must be consistent with our department's mandates. That's important, especially when you get to the next section on ineligible donors.
Yep. And I just, some municipal policies had a section on ineligible donors, some didn't. So I just put that in there for discussion purposes. You know, if it complicates things, you can always take it out, knowing that you might have your own radar when it comes before you. But I figured you should discuss it because it is in some policies. And like I said, I haven't solicited much opinion. I just did a quick survey of, you know, some that I could find out there. But that may create more conversation than is really worth having. I don't know. So I just put it out there.
It's really important to recognize here that I think the discussion around, once we get to ineligible donors here, is really around controversial donations. So, for example, the question around arms manufacturers. The school district would probably not want to accept donations from an arms manufacturer, but the police department is in a completely different position with accepting that type of donation. So the question, you know, becomes how do you kind of make those distinctions
Right.
in this policy?
I think that's a council question. That's a policy question. I'm not sure it's,
I mean, yeah. Using your example, I would think that it might be a conflict of interest to accept a donation from a arms manufacturer, you know, to, I mean, whether it's overt or not, it's clearly they want you to buy their stuff.
Then the question becomes, what if the entity is a local entity and your police department has a goal of buying things locally to support local business? And that local business creates a good relationship with the police department. The police department still has to go out for bid for anything they do. But in buying certain materials from the local business says, we're going to throw in these other things to you because you're such a great customer. That is a donation.
Is it, or is that a contract negotiation?
It can be.
Yeah.
So this is where the fine line is. It's like, how do you make those distinctions? I think that's really important to think about. You know.
I agree, and keeping this at something where the differences among departments issues, you know, like the police department's issues about anonymity or other things would not normally, I mean, I could see maybe it could someday affect us, but we're more likely to have those vendors who are trying to be really nice to us that we have to watch out for, and not a lot of arms manufacturers are offering us money, but it could happen. And then we would look at our mission and our values and our policies and say, it doesn't really fit, right? So it's interesting. But I think that's fascinating where it's local as well as, you
Right.
know, your department, your type of department, but also a lot of us are looking at local and sustainable options, so it's tricky.
Yeah, this becomes challenging,
Yeah.
I think, pretty quickly. Plus,
Didn't we get a donation from somebody for body cameras at one point?
I don't know.
well, we were talking about the Weber
Was that what?
money going to
Okay.
body cameras,
Yeah.
yeah.
and that money does have strings attached around safety, if I'm correct.
Right.
It has to go to safety apparatus. So, but again, you know, those
So
are
that was a
calls we make.
decision of the department rather than the decision of the donor for body cam?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So we do need to be mindful that that we have some entities in our community that are strong businesses that would probably love to support us.
And some do support us.
And some do
Yeah.
support us.
Or
And we
do
need to be.
support activities within the city.
Exactly. So we need to be really mindful of what kind of policy we have there. And if there's a conflict of interest, and who defines that conflict of interest? Do we leave it to individual departments, just that the council create the policy?
I think it would be interesting to get feedback from the departments on this particular section, because I do think it does impact different departments. And it would just be good to get more voices and perspectives. And I do think procurement is a very special and tender area, as Christine was kind of highlighting, and I know there's a fair bit of caution within the finance department, when something is out to bid or when it's about to go out for bid, kind of closing that door on communications. The bid document is out, and there it is, and being very sensitive to that. So.
And would there be a way for any of those, legal but ineligible donors to donate to the city in general that would not have an effect on choices? Is there a way, I don't know, you have to take out the decision makers from benefiting in some way? Do you know what I mean? If you had tobacco companies that instead of donating to the library said, we want to give money to the city of Portsmouth, and
For a health program.
yeah, for general, or somewhere where it's not going to affect the people who make purchasing decisions, so
Right.
doesn't feel like a conflict. I don't know.
Right.
Right, questions around, they decide as part of kind of a bigger effort to expend funds out of a trust that they had created because
Right.
of
Required to, yeah.
that
Yes.
they're required to create. They want to donate for a playground, or they want to donate for,
Yep.
various entities, then,
Well, or let's say that Pepsi or Coca-Cola wants to donate to the high school, but also sells all their product in all the vending machines,
Right.
and they want to donate to the Booster Club, or they want to donate to the, playgrounds or whatever. There's a,
I think that's where you have the question. So who creates that
right.
distinction?
Right. And, when we get gift certificates for different programs to give out as prizes, where do you get those gift certificates from? So you've got those pieces. Yeah, so it's very interesting. And I think it's interesting. I kind of made a note under this ineligible donors about managing the conflict, because I think, someone may be an appropriate donor as long as there isn't a conflict with that gift.
Exactly.
And certainly if you had, we have people who, are lobbyists, we wouldn't generally want donations from lobbyists. On the other hand, if someone who happens to be a registered lobbyist wants to go to pay a $20 ticket to go to a fundraising event for some program, would you really want to say, no, don't come to the program if they're a member of the community? And I think the answer is no. So I kind of like maybe there's a piece there, or if it's, right, just trying to think, because they're part of the community, and maybe their kid's event,
Right.
right? That is a bit of a fundraiser for something. So, like I said, this is very early, but I wanted to kind of get your perspective on your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to discourage people from participating in the community, but we want those protections in place. So,
Exactly. I can think of all kinds of issues that are a little bit challenging here.
yeah. Well, why don't I I'll take kind of what I've heard and get some input from other folks, and I like maybe marrying a bit of the conflict piece in here.
And we need to be really clear about what our policy is on this and who makes the determination and why and how. And that it is their authority to make the determination without, without interference. And because you don't want to end up in a situation where an organization says, oh, you just won't take our money. They won't take our money. And it publicly is,
Right.
the city of Portsmouth won't do,
Yep.
when it's really clear in our donation policy what is eligible and what isn't. So I think there are some distinctions that can be clear. I think others, we need to be very structured in the way we
Yep.
handle it. Yeah. The authority to accept and spend a cash donation.
We already have that authority. It was in the draft policy I was working from, so I just kind of left it there.
I think it's important, though,
Yeah.
that it doesn't need to come back to the council if the city manager then wants to spend the funds, or the department head wants to spend the funds.
Yep.
You don't want it to come back again. Which is what we have to do with major expenditures of the city if we're bonding anything. So we don't want any misperception about how many times it comes before the council. Costs associated. This is where, Councilor Tabor, you have a question.
Right, but let's back up to 7 again.
Okay?
Should we have any language that says that something to the effect of the departments can't sit on the money, if it's been given for a purpose? That it be spent expeditiously. I'm thinking of a donor who, says, I want to give this to the African Burying Ground. And the money sits in the trust account and doesn't ever get used. Or there's just not implementation. Do we want any kind of language about, there should be some follow-through?
Well,
Right.
once it goes into a trust, the trust governs, and that's it. But I was trying to think of a similar example where we take stuff that's not in a trust.
I have some examples.
Go for it.
So some of our donations that were given, not only way before my time, but way before my birth, have a rule in them that only the interest can be used and the principal can never be touched. We also have things like currently some matching funds that were given to us for the courtyard. So they will sit there until the money is appropriated. Given to us to spend through CIP or the budget or in what other ways. And I'm trying to think of others, but that, I understand what you're saying, that it shouldn't, there could be, and I don't know if any of our departments have things like long-term plan of their own, what's the term I want, to donate to the, a big fund.
Like a capital campaign. kind of thing.
Exactly. So there could be governed by the certain principles of the donation, but I know what you mean, that we're not just piling up money because someone gave it to us, but it's actually spent appropriately.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of examples where we as a city have had fundraising in conjunction with a private entity, like the African Burying Ground, SIP, to save the indoor pool. There were a lot of donations to rehabilitate the pool. Prescott Park, we may have to have fundraising for that. A combination of private money and public money. And this is hypothetical, but let's say that people gave to renovate the pool and nothing happened for 5 years.
Yeah, right.
Or people gave to Prescott Park and nothing happened for 5 years.
Right.
How do we deal with that? Do we require some explanation back to the donors? Or do we just count on the fact that it's a public process and everybody's aware of what's going on?
So I think there's two things. First, if it's in the trust, once you put it into a trust instrument, that is going to govern,
Right.
period, by and large. And then you have, frankly, good old-fashioned pick up the phone. You know, if the donation, say, to the cemetery committee is languishing because of X, I think it's a call to the city manager that says, hey, you know, made this donation. This hasn't happened yet. Could you follow up and see when it might be expended? I think it's actually, I think if you try and put strictures on it,
Yeah.
you're going to find those strictures are going to be too narrow for the broad types of way that money and services and gifts come into the city, because it's so diverse that it'd be hard to come up with one rule. But I think these, at least in my years, when people are not happy,
They call.
they call or they show up and express, you know, their concerns. Would that be? Yeah. And then if something's been languishing, it can move off the plate. Yeah.
I think there is an important distinction, though, around donations being given that are accepted by the council, for example, to go into a program that you're expecting to have developed within the next year or 2 years, or to an item. But then there isn't a lot of appetite on the part of, say, another council or even city staff to move forward with a certain project, and it could sit for 15, 20 years because those that accepted it had a different view than the people currently governing, and that isn't a priority project anymore.
Right.
So I think there is a concern around making sure that when things are when money is donated, specifically, that it is something that the city will move forward with.
Right.
And that after a certain period of years, that there should be a check-in to see if the donor wants the money still sitting there or not.
Right.
Yeah.
I think of, like, we're planting 400 trees, and that's going to increase the maintenance of those trees significantly. So I don't know, I know there's been donations to the trees, but can some of that donation go to the maintenance, ongoing maintenance? I don't know. Is that and that's,
That's a good question.
yeah.
I don't,
you know, we
I
live
don't
in a-
have all the history on that one. I know about it, but I don't have all the
Yeah.
history of what the expectations are.
I mean, everyone's really excited about
Yeah,
the greening,
yeah.
and but we don't want to see the browning, you know?
I mean, we had the, if I'm not mistaken, the farm-to-table position in the schools was privately funded for a couple of years, and then became public, and then didn't make it through one of the budget rounds. But, you know, we're in an era when people want to do impact giving in philanthropy. And so that creates some, if they want to do that in conjunction with the city, you know, how do you make sure that their impact that they sought actually happens?
So that can be done at the time that you accept the funds, in the sense that if it's a substantial enough donation, because, you know, think in mind, most of our donations are less than $250 when you think about it. So you really don't want to be micromanaging the smaller ones. But if you've got someone who's going to say, oh, I'm going to give $10,000, it'll be for X purpose, then there certainly might be some expectation of when that would be expended. I know it took us a long time, thinking of African Burial Ground, it took us a long time to raise the money needed to actually make that memorial park. So, you know, it's kind of hard to sometimes figure out how long something is going to take. But you're right, sometimes the politics change, and so
Right.
the energy changes. And I think if it's a substantial enough donation that the donor wants to have some more assurity, then you either do it as a trust or you do it with specific limitations when when the city accepts that, to say, I'd like to see that it's expended within 2 years or 3 years or some period of time. But I think that only becomes an issue when you have larger donations.
Sure. Yeah.
Councilor Lombardi?
Does the city get donations from trusts of, when people die? I mean, do people leave? I know the library does, yes. I mean, but other,
The city in general? I don't know.
city in general?
Not often that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Geraldine Weber notwithstanding.
Right, that would be
Yeah.
an exception. Yeah, but it tends to be more specific, like to a fire or police department or a
Or-
library.
or-
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So do we think that we need to change anything here around, that was an authority acceptance?
It was 7.
Yes, 7. In purposes intended. You could put a little phrase within a reasonable time frame, or,
Well, that
and just let
depends.
reasonable be,
Right, right.
Appropriate?
yeah. Yeah,
I
within an
don't know if
appropriate
you
time
want
frame.
to memorialize a time frame, because I think of what Councilor Tabor's discussed, it might be a different council and that has no priority.
Right. It's tricky.
I mean, you could have a phrase within an appropriate time frame, or the donor should be contacted regarding,
Advised,
or,
of what's
Might be
happening.
hard, again, if it's a big donation, then it's not that hard to track. If people start having expectations over the smaller donations, I think that would be difficult to say, oh, did we spend all $20 on,
Yeah, well, of
You know.
course.
I'm thinking of donations in the, somebody made a $10,000 donation.
right?
And then politics change, project's no longer intriguing to the
Right.
next council.
Priorities change.
So it doesn't move forward, and the money just sits there. I think that's more of a challenge, I think. And for the person who makes that, honestly, there's a very big difference between people who make $10,000, $20,000 donations and people who make $500,000 donations. Because the people who usually make those smaller, the $10,000, $20,000, it's a large donation, but that probably is a lot bigger donation to them than somebody who can make the really big donation. So I'm thinking that that's a priority donation for a check back.
I think that's one you would negotiate.
Yes, yes,
And
exactly.
we've certainly had large donations, not often, but certainly for
The
the
building?
library, for the building. And that was fully negotiated and,
Oh, was it?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What I'll do is I'll kind of flag when I send this out and around. We'd like comments on timeframe for spending, any issues, any concerns, and then I'll report that back. How's that?
It's great.
That would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, my question was, staff has the authority to expend donations for the purposes intended. What if they don't?
It's possible.
If that's an eventuality, how do we deal with that?
Yeah.
There are certain, when you take something from, I guess it depends on how it comes in, whether it did come in for a special purpose. There are laws that are applicable when, for example, if we're getting rid of selling a building and it has a special restriction on it because we received it with certain restrictions, there's a whole process that has to happen because it has that special condition or restriction on it. And as far as I'm aware, those would be applicable to those circumstances. If you didn't spend it, you've got to, perhaps due process with the Division of Charitable Trusts
Right.
to relieve yourself of that obligation to then spend the money for some other purpose.
Right.
Right.
So that's what I would see happening. I don't see it happening when you get small stuff, or a lot of times we just accept, oh, we really don't. And when you think of what's come before the city council, it's not much, or it tends to be very much for a specific purpose, like the cemetery or, yeah, so, I don't know, let me noodle that over.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
I think we're only talking about the major
yeah,
Yeah.
sums of money.
yeah.
But there are people who want to have an impact on the city in a positive way.
Yep.
And we have all the provisions in here that if their view of what's positive and the councils differ, we can politely say no. But
Yep.
Okay. Then costs associated with proposed donation.
And I just grabbed this language from some other municipalities, form. So if we don't like it, we're not stuck with it. I just did it. So, well, let's put this in here for discussion purposes.
we've actually had some language like this around
Art.
public art.
Yep,
Yes.
Yes.
And
exactly.
I don't recall it was as high as 20. I think
No,
it
it's
was
No,
at
it
10%.
wasn't like 10.
10%
Yeah.
of the value of the donation is
Yep.
what it is for public art.
Yep.
So, and $1,000 maintenance is really high. So this would be a
Right.
pretty big donation.
Yep.
If we had $1,000 in maintenance. Now, I can see how maybe 400 trees might require. So I can see what Councilor Lombardi was saying.
It's a lot of trees to water.
It's a lot of trees. But, the question then becomes, I guess, what are we talking about that really requires $1,000 in annual maintenance? You might have something that requires that much in maintenance, but it wouldn't, annualized, it wouldn't be
Right.
$1,000.
Right. So your typical benches and other individual small structures would probably not have $1,000 in annual.
But if somebody wanted to donate an antique home to the city,
That's what I was
Right.
thinking.
it'd be a lot of maintenance. Yeah.
Yep.
But it could also bring in revenue in some way that might offset
Yes,
those
exactly.
costs, so.
Exactly, so then you'd have to weigh that. I saw this happen actually with a nonprofit organization who received the donation of a house that was in trust and had all kinds of stipulations around historic preservation attached to it, and they couldn't afford to restore it. It took 5 years to go through the process of setting up all the provisions to sell it instead of trying to maintain it themselves. But there were all kinds of legal hoops to jump through because the donation was made to them and they didn't have any, and it came without funds for maintenance. So that's something to be really mindful of here.
Yep.
It's protection, and it says that the city, it can be waived. The requirements can be waived.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
So we're saying that the GSA should supply the ongoing maintenance of McIntyre.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Done.
dreams. So,
Sorry.
yeah, this is, I think it's reasonable. It's fairly reasonable, because it leaves it to the council and the city to decide what that ongoing maintenance looks like as far as what they would accept. And that's all a negotiation
Right.
with the donor, I would think.
Yep. And it would depend on other factors, as Christine said. You know, is there some longer-term revenue generating that balances it out or something? Yeah.
Very reasonable. Procedure approvals in general.
Yeah, I got to have that in there.
Yeah. Again, that, you know, you don't want anyone donating if they're trying to get approvals. Procurement donations, or procurement decisions, sorry. Any questions about that?
Do we have any,
Again, I wonder about contract negotiations for purchases and how this is separate from that. I mean, you know, in a contract negotiation, you negotiate a lower price.
But remember, this is a city council policy for what you accept.
Yeah, that's true.
And you guys are not involved in contract negotiations,
Right.
so.
We shouldn't
That goes
be.
back to then there's the separate one that I'm governed by, including, in addition, I have all my legal ethics, which are its own set of special
I bet they are.
love.
Yeah. It's reasonable, I think, here around procurement.
Yep.
Donations of personal or real property. And this comes back to that question of
House.
donating a
Yeah.
house. Gives me all new ideas about what I could do with my house for a
There you
minute.
go.
You know, and I think the school wrestles or deals with, for example, donations of computer equipment, and maybe you have that too. And you really want that to be subject to the department head, because it may be that whatever's proposed to be donated is not compatible with what we have, or will create security risks, or, you know, it's very I think up to the department to really assess, is it really going to be of value to our
People
work?
always want to donate their old computers.
This is where the books discussion also comes in.
Yeah.
So what happens with books at the library?
I'm so glad you asked. So libraries in general, I think people are accustomed to donating to libraries because of book sales, and we do not have a book sale. So we've also looked at a couple things to think about. We have several used bookstores, and we don't want to be competing with our local businesses. So that was among our decision-making steps. We do now, however, have the little free libraries. And so we balance how much time and effort it would take for our staff to go through these books, because some people unfortunately just put them in our drop, which is not helpful. People bring us their precious books from their attic or their basement, which may or may not be in any usable condition. But many people do bring in a few current new fiction novels. They just finished the latest Lee Child, and we then look at our collection and see, are we missing it, or is our copy older? Or might we put it in the little free libraries and use it within the community? And that's kind of our donation policy says, if you give it to us, it belongs to us. We can recycle it. We can, we could sell it if we were doing so. We can use it in our little free libraries in our collection. You don't get to decide, and we don't call you back and say, come get your books. If you give it to us, because of the cost and effort of staff, and we cut it off entirely during COVID just because we just did not have the bandwidth to deal with donations. I will say that the two areas that get the best acceptance rate are local history. So if it belongs in our special collections, or it has some local the reason the writer or the content is about Portsmouth or the Seacoast, that's more likely. And again, if it's like modern fiction that we think is going to be used either in our collection or in the Little Free Libraries, that's great. 30-year-old textbooks, National Geographics, old encyclopedias are the ones that libraries around the country just kind of go, oh. We don't know what to do with it either, so.
I understand that, neither do I. I'm happy to give them to somebody who wants them.
It is a problem.
And I think this is what Christine just explained in terms of how the library has thoughtfully kind of looked at what makes sense from their management perspective, and the trustees kind of weighing in as they develop the policy about, oh, we have local bookstores that do X. And I think that's the advantage for this level of detail being done kind of within the specialty area that we're talking about, because, I would not have, thought right off the top of my head about, oh, yeah, the local bookstores that you might not want to compete with. And certainly it's the kind of thing that being immersed in that and having to confront that, I think, shows the value of, that kind of input and work done at their level specific to their department. So.
I should mention to everyone here, but everyone else involved in this, also that our legal department does review all our policies. So within the context of your other policies, they may have information that I'm not aware of, but they look at that before it's approved by our board so that we're not in conflict with anything.
I think on this matter, too, we want to be mindful that in Portsmouth, we have some people that have amazing collections of Portsmouth artifacts that if they do offer them to the city, we want to be able to accept certain things or to direct to the appropriate local entity where that donation should go.
Do you want to talk about that, Christine?
Yeah.
Vince can talk about that. We do have, I'll say from the library's perspective, we have a serious space issue. So there are collections that, that we see and we think this would be great. It has local connections, but we have no place to put it, much less ability to maintain it. That's an issue with personal collections and with art in particular. But
Yeah, and we're just discussing that. We had our first meeting of the archive committee, and obviously we're talking about print primarily, paper, and not artifacts. That's a whole nother game, and there's people with a lot of that too. And so maybe that's the next council's job.
But our committee includes people that do focus on that, like Strawberry Bank,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Not the city. We're not talking about that in the city, but
Right.
yeah. Even the paper is hard. Even the
Oh, that's just a lot.
yeah.
It's just a lot.
No more space.
It's a lot. It's a lot. That's so it's important to have this in here. So we have this discretion around donations
Agreed.
of property. I'm so glad that the archive committee has started its work, by the way, as a side note. Managing and reporting donations. This is an important piece around reporting.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think that we leave the requirements around reporting to individual elected entities as well. The council then can have its own kind of practice around this, because that might change to council to council. So this council might say, let's just report them out quarterly.
Yep.
And you might have another council that says, this is easier just to put it in every packet. But
This is a council policy,
Correct.
so, I think the council's not going to solicit, so, right?
well, that's iffy. So we can say the council is not going to solicit, but the council might solicit donations for things like skateboard park. So
Yeah.
we frequently mention in council meetings that we're still taking donations for the skateboard park.
Yeah.
If we were to take donations for Prescott Park master plan, again, the council would be soliciting donations.
Okay.
The council just received a large donation from the Rotary Club for a new ADA accessible playground. So that's, once again, another. So we have to be thinking about, the council will do some solicitation of donations from the community.
And respond to requests and complaints, or questions and complaints.
Where you call Karen. And
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, I mean, I would think that's more of a staff role there.
it is a staff role, but I think that the council policy defines the staff's actions.
guides.
So I think that's
Okay.
why that's
Okay.
there.
All right, that's fair.
Acknowledgements, forms, and receipts. And I have a question, actually, that the legal department will know. Donations of $100 or more triggers an IRS acknowledgement if you're deducting something for taxes on an annual basis. Are donations to the city, though, tax deductible, as they are to nonprofits?
So we are not a 501(c)(3).
Right.
So that standard letter that you will see when you donate to any one of our many wonderful charitable organizations, we don't. That's not our realm. On the other hand, we have. With carefully worded language that says, we are not your tax accountant. However, we are I forget the exact language. We have a form letter upstairs. But, we basically say we're not a 501(c), but we are a charitable organization kind of thing. Not organization, but we're a municipality and tax exempt or something like that. There is a standard letter that we have put together for those purposes. We generally don't give them that tax piece unless asked for, simply because we just hadn't gotten in the practice, and most donations are under 100. But I know when we were taking them, I think for the African Burying Ground, and maybe when we when we were doing a lot of fundraising and getting the bigger donations, we did come up with a letter that acknowledged that the gift was to the city of Portsmouth.
I like this idea of formal recognition and acceptance of anything of $100 or more, because that is standard practice across
Yeah.
in the donor world.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we're getting, as far as I can hear through the grapevine, that's why it would be good to get input from the other departments, because I've heard of more of those requests coming in, and that, then they'll call up to legal, what can we write? And so I thought, well, let's put something in here, and I'll see what we get for communication back. But we're careful to say we're not providing legal advice or tax advice, but we are blah, 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 blah. So there's, like I said, some stock little paragraph we've used before to acknowledge the gift.
Very good. Okay. That's good. Accounts. And this is in the handling, essentially the handling of donations.
Yeah, and I know Judy and Andrew have all their processes, so we'll see if they have any feedback on this language, but I know they're pretty cognizant of what's got strings attached.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's important that we highlight that donations without specifications are considered general revenue.
Yep.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll be getting
External
into
trusts.
creation of tons of accounts.
Right. Right. We don't want to inadvertently create a need to set up several more trusts.
Right.
Okay, and that's it?
Nope.
Any general questions that we want to ask before we move forward?
What about instances, this is a hypothetical, where we have a donor that's a shell organization, and we don't know who the principals are? Do we need any kind of language that we need to know who the donors are? That they're not hidden behind any kind of shell organization?
I guess that's really up to you if you want that level of inquiry. I mean, if you look back, that would kind of go under the ineligible donors. I mean, if you're concerned, I think the best we can do is make a good faith effort to understand who the donor is. So kind of with that bar that we don't have to do an exhaustive search, of someone's history to see if they're related to, a crime organization. We can,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's certainly not unreasonable from my point of view to look beyond the face of the organization if there are concerns that it might not be,
I'm just thinking,
an eligible donor.
if we got at the city council level, we get $5,000 donation from the Committee to Improve Portsmouth, and we don't know who it is, or the committee for this, or the committee for that. And
What does that mean?
what is that? Yeah,
What is that?
our job is to know, our job is to look at these donations and make sure that we want to accept them. We understand we want to be sure there are no conflicts or no areas of undue influence.
Right.
Do you ever get anonymous donations? Is there, I don't remember seeing something here. If you did, what would be, I mean, if
Typically-
you don't know it's from one of those ineligible entities, what would happen?
Right. I think on my list here is to really spell out more what we would do with anonymous donations. I think for the small ones, I'm not worried about it, but it's the big ones. If it's $5,000 or $10,000, what to do with that anonymous donation? My initial thought is if there are no strings attached to it, I'm less concerned. I'll say I have no concern, but I am less concerned if there are no strings. But the minute there's a string attached, then from my point of view, that gets into, can we do a conflict analysis? Is there a reason why this donation is coming in? That's my level of inquiry goes up if there's some string or a condition or a specific program. Like that's what would be triggering it. But the city council, could always say, look, we're not comfortable with this. City manager, could you go back and have a conversation? Could you vet this donation and then provide, and if need be in a non-public session, a confidential report back if the donor really wanted to be anonymous because maybe they won the lottery, right? And they are looking to distribute $10,000 to, every city in New Hampshire.
Right.
Because they love New Hampshire. And it's coming through some trust instrument, and they want to be anonymous. Would we want that money? And the answer is yes. But they may not want acknowledgement because they don't want anyone to know they won the, mega millions, and they just want to give gifts to local towns and municipalities for their purposes or for recreational programs.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's where the city council could, ask the city manager, could you see if you could get enough information to inform the city council in a way that would provide assurances that there's no obvious or apparent conflict or concern that the, money is laundered from some organization.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah,
Drug
if you have a,
cartel.
well, yeah, I was thinking like a Russian oligarch, it's like, his money.
There we go.
Is trying to,
move here.
yeah, you're like, gotta be careful. Yeah, so,
Well, I think we're all, you know, this is a city that people do give to a lot of things. And we just want, I mean, for me, I just want to make sure that as a counselor, I'm approving something that truly helps the city with no strings attached, and is ethical and above board and transparent.
Yep.
You know,
yeah.
we got policies in place to make
Not
sure.
much to ask for, is it?
It's like very small. At this stage, is it okay for us to ask this deputy city manager, deputy city attorney to move forward, making a few changes and checking in with departments at the same time before bringing it back to us?
Please do.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
And everyone's comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So then we will come back to this. It won't be at our next meeting. It'll be the following meeting. Because the next meeting, we're hoping to have a parks discussion. So
Is that
so
March?
That would be, I think it's, I don't know the exact date.
Hold on.
Off the top of my head.
Hold up.
I'm going to stop sharing this.
17th, I believe.
Yes, I believe it's actually
Oh, we have
I
from
think-
February 27th?
February,
Isn't that the Parks one?
no, the Parks one is February the 13th. We don't have
Okay,
I
February
believe
27th.
a second meeting set up for February. I believe there was a concern around, there's several extra council sessions. And then our next meeting, from what I can tell, oh, I actually don't have it in my calendar.
When
That's
is-
unfortunate.
Yeah, when is the next?
I thought we had
I
one.
think that I have it for February 13th, and I don't know, we might have one do we have one the 27th?
I thought we
We
did.
might have one the 27th of February. If that's the case, that's when it would come back. I will make sure I get out a calendar to everyone.
Yeah, I thought we had all the
I
dates
had-
at the end of the December meeting.
Yes, we
That's
did.
why
And
I'm kind of disappointed.
I
it's
don't
not
have
on.
them all in my calendar. I will get out a list to everyone so that everybody is aware of the meetings again. And I wanted to take just a moment to say thank you so much for
pleasure.
coming in again.
Very
and
interesting.
spending time with us and answering some of our questions. It's nice that even if the city council hasn't done this yet, that the departments in the city have taken the lead. And in that sense, we really appreciate the advice.
Well, thank you for listening to us. It's nice to know what you're doing, too.
Yeah. Well, we don't always know what we're doing.
We try.
We try.
So I'm going to go back to the agenda so that everybody can see where we are. Again, the next item is upcoming parks discussion is the 13th. It is February 27th that I have us coming back for donations policy again. So those are the upcoming committee topics. And under new business, we will get to hear from Councilor Tabor on this. We had a question at the last council session around fee study committee. And should we add a member to the fee study committee because we have two, which makes voting difficult if they don't agree on an item. And I wanted to get the thoughts of this group, if we want to take that up, if we want to take up changes to that or not. So start with Councilor Tabor since he sits on the fee study committee.
Well, you know, it was interesting. The mayor clearly saw the problem and asked the governance look at this because we were trying to decide, the two of us as counselors, Councilor Denton and I, had different views on the level of fees for outdoor dining. We weren't off by much. But with two people, if one proposes a motion and the other doesn't second, even for discussion, it's dead. So it's kind of like paddling a rowboat with one oar. You go around in a circle. And I did think about this a little because I saw it on the agenda. I think it's a discussion worth having. The purpose of the fee committee is to have, each year the city has more than 150 different fees. And so the fee committee treats these kind of as an omnibus part of the budget. And our real reason for being is, are these fees reasonable? Do they cover expenses incurred and no more? Or are they higher than that? And that's something, a fee should, I think by policy, correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne, I don't think we can charge more than offsetting the costs.
Correct.
So that's the reason for the review of all the fees. And it generally meets once or twice a year to do that. But we were referred the question of outdoor dining and found that as a deliberative body of two people, it was hard to deliberate. So I'll lay that at everybody's feet and say that's the problem. If we had three people, something could be seconded and voted more easily. You'd always have, and obviously a motion will not carry if in a committee of two if one disagrees. So a committee of three could have 2 out of 3 and a motion would carry, or 1 out of 3 and a motion would fail. But you got a better shot at getting something done.
And I'm reasonably sure, because I think we discussed this, that I don't think there's actually an ordinance that formally creates the fee committee. I think this is something that evolved over time. So I was just double checking.
That's a good point.
So I think that could be something that could be worked on.
Okay.
That it may be a slightly different effort, which is to create more formally the committee structure, in which case one could have 3, not 2. But I have a feeling we looked at this and said, oh, how did this committee actually arise? We've had it for a long time. But I don't think it is actually, unless it was maybe adopted by a policy of some prior council, but I'm not sure in Chapter 1 that there is actually.
Yeah, I don't see anything
I
here.
have-
Standing fee committee.
Yeah, I have
I mean, it
a
was
chart.
met in 2018. But
I think it was, it's been in one of the mayor's appointments for the last 3 or 4 terms.
Oh, yeah, it's
It
been
has,
around for
and
Yep.
for a long
I can
time.
say that is one of the very few committees in reviewing, when we did our board's commission committee review.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it is one of only, 1, 2 now, that it's not clear how it was established by ordinance or policy. It was probably just a vote of the council at some point along the line to establish that, in the same way that the governance committee was established by just a request and a vote of the council. So, so it would probably be council established, the way that it's set up. If we want to set up a more permanent method for it, we can. We can move forward with setting up an ordinance for a fee study committee. We have a few I think that we have several entities, and I can add this to the list around questions around, should they just be council established or mayoral, or should they actually be ordinance related? I
Right.
think the ones that come up are the long-standing blue ribbon committees, like sustainability. It's been around for a very, very long time. What happens with the energy advisory committee? Does it change into,
Right.
you know, another committee that monitors, you know, and becomes more permanent as we move towards community power? You
Does
know,
it broaden its scope?
exactly. So we'll have to be thinking about some of those mid-year and how we navigate that and what recommendations we make for making committees more permanent.
If you'd like, now that it's kind of more in my forefront since I was concentrated on donations, maybe for the next meeting, you know, I can solicit Susan and Bob's input on this and the city managers in terms of whether there's any recommendation, whether to make it a more permanent committee or whether to keep it more informal and, you know, it's just a policy of the city council that there is this fee committee, or it's simply the mayor appoints, you know, one or more members to work with city staff on development of the fees. So I could bring back some options for the next meeting.
I think the impetus, I think, came from the city manager in the past, saying, we can look at all these fees, but we probably should have
Yeah.
some city council participation in it.
Yeah, I think that was the impetus. And I thought it was originally just one counselor, and maybe it's been
Yes,
broadened over time.
I think it was just
Yep,
Councilor Dwyer.
yep. So,
But it's been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
So this is another example. We have several of these that are sitting that have been around for a long time. And in some ways, they don't have very good guidelines, too, in how they operate. I think fee study, it's pretty clear what is done. But some others don't have really clear guidelines because there isn't an ordinance governing practice or appointments or how long people serve or any of those things. So this is something that we should be, if it's okay with everyone here, I'll add it to our list of committees to review. And maybe we start with it because it's probably the easiest one to tackle. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, what I found here is that contact Andrew, you know, you know, so.
It's
Yep.
it's there, but it's not there.
great.
Okay.
All right, so I'll
sounds
work on
good.
something. Yep.
I now will open it up to public comment. Do we have anyone on? Nope. And it doesn't appear that we have
Amazing.
anyone
I
here.
think this is the first governance committee that we haven't had public.
We haven't had public comment. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that said, I will close public comment. If there's nothing else, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.